One of the most interesting parts of every award season is finding out which movie or actor or director will become the inevitable narrative villain leading up to the Oscars. For example, I did a video last year about Bradley Cooper's role in the film Maestro, and how his try-hard quest for an Oscar was becoming rather off-putting. And then there's something like Green Book, 2018's Best Picture Oscar winner, that has been routinely criticized as a tone-deaf film about race. Look, I follow the Oscars race pretty much every year. It's been a while since I have seen a villain quite like Emilia Perez, and we're gonna talk about why today. But there's a lot of perspectives to consider. You have to consider how this movie portrays the trans experience and the Mexican experience, and those are experiences that I cannot speak to because I don't belong to either of those communities, which is why in this video I'm going to be including interviews that I did with a couple of my subscribers, Charlie, Desi, and Samantha. So thank you so much to them for participating in this video. I really think that you're going to enjoy the perspective that they brought here. Emilia Perez is a musical drama film about a Mexican cartel leader who enlists the help of a lawyer to help her leave the cartel life behind and transition into a woman. Despite the fact that the film narratively takes place in Mexico for most of the time, the film is actually French and it was made by a French director. So I am going to explain the entire plot because I think it is necessary context to explain why this movie is rubbing so many people the wrong way. I'm sorry, this is kind of a video I can't do without spoilers, but if you haven't watched the movie yet, honestly, you're better off not even giving it a chance. I promise you, you are not missing much. Okay, so the film starts with this lawyer named Rita, played by Zoe Saldana, who is generally underappreciated by society, but is really good at what she does. After a high-profile trial that she ends up winning, she agrees to a meeting with a high-profile client after a mysterious phone call, and that client is revealed to be a cartel leader named Manitas. Manitas explains to Rita that he wants to basically disappear off the face of the earth and relive his new life as a woman. Rita visits a bunch of doctors to try to figure out what exactly it will take to perform this kind of feat, which is where the viral penis to vagina song comes in. We'll get there when we talk about the music, I promise. The procedure is completed by a doctor in Tel Aviv. Rita is given a large sum of money for her assistance. Manitas' wife and 2 children are relocated to Switzerland, and Manitas is able to transition and live her life as Emilia Perez. The main conflict of the plot really kicks off when Emilia wants to reunite with her children, and so Emilia enlists the help of Rita once again to bring the children from Switzerland along with Manitas' wife Jessie, and they all start living in this house in Mexico City together under the guise of Emilia being a distant cousin of Manitas. Jessie, who is played by Selena Gomez, is not really happy with this arrangement, but she agrees to go through with it just so she can keep seeing an affair partner that she once had when she was living in Mexico. This is where the whole movie kind of switches to having a different plot, where Rita and Emilia found a non-profit that helps identify the bodies of cartel victims because Emilia is suddenly very, regretful about her former life as a cartel leader. Eventually, Jessie tells Emilia that she plans on relocating the children to a new home with her new affair partner Gustavo, who she has now rekindled a full-on relationship with, and then Emilia becomes very physically aggressive to her and Jessie runs away. Emilia then cuts off Jessie's allowance in order to stop her from leaving Mexico City with the children, and in retaliation for this, Jessie thinks that it would be a good idea to kidnap Emilia and then demand a ransom from Rita so that she could get her money and go live the new life with the kids. Then there's a shootout and Emilia reveals her true identity to Jessie. Jessie and her partner load Emilia into the trunk and drive away, but then Jessie changes her mind and tells him to pull over. She holds a gun to his head, the two fight over it, and the car ends up swerving off the road, and then everyone in the car just dies. Rita then takes guardianship of Emilia and Jessie's kids, and then at the end of the movie, there's like this parade where they all, I guess, pay tribute to Emilia Perez, kind of. So this movie is a bizarre combo of messy, boring, and offensive, and as someone who just watched the movie a couple months ago not knowing the full context of why it was offensive, my takeaway was that it was definitely messy and boring, so we're going to talk about how it works as a film first, and then get into the rest of the controversy here. Let's start with the good first, I guess. I did not enjoy this movie too much, but I do think that Zoe Saldana does give a good performance as Rita. That's no surprise. Zoe Saldana has always been, like, a good actress. I just think she was very captivating to watch on screen, and I found myself having a better time every time I was watching her. Other than that, though, I think the main issue with this movie, besides, its confused, kind of half-baked politics, is that, like, on a fundamental level, it doesn't really know what it wants to be. All of these musical sequences are super campy, and yet the movie is so devoid of, like, any kind of humor. It's so joyless and at times, like, kind of exhausting with how self-serious it is. And then the other issue is that this is, like, two plots within 3 separate acts. Like, the first act and the third act kind of align with each other, but the second act, which is more focused on Emilia and Rita and their nonprofit, it's like so not connected to the major themes of this movie. And I guess you can argue that a lot of it is like Emilia learning to accept responsibility for her involvement in the cartel, but like she never truly does. There's this one musical sequence where all of these family members are coming to like figure out the identities of those who were, taken by the cartel. And again, it's this like self-serious congratulatory song. You can tell that the filmmaker is patting himself on the back metaphorically for addressing such a sensitive issue in the movie. But in the grand scheme of things, it's basically treated as like a second act subplot. I guess let's talk about the songs while we're at it. They're not good. They're not good songs. None of them are good songs. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen the movie, but the majority of the songs don't have any melody. You know what? Like, it's almost like talk singing, like rhythmic talk singing, but there is a beat behind it and there is choreography at points. Like, you can tell that they are trying to make a musical, but the songs are just so flat and boring and not memorable, and the only one that anyone fucking remembers is the penis to vagina one, which I guess I will talk about right now.
Hello, very nice to meet you. I'd like to know about sex change operation.
I see. Men to woman, or woman to men.
Man to woman.
From penis to vagina.
Now, the reason I say memorable is because it's so ridiculous that of course you remember it. Like, throughout this entire week, I feel like Brian and I, because we've heard so much about Emilia Perez since the Golden Globes happened, which I'll get to a little later, sometimes him and I will just, like, look at each other and go, penis to vagina. Like, it's so fucking stupid, but, like, at least it sticks in your head. The context of this, by the way, is when Rita is trying to find out about, like, how much it will cost and the logistics of getting Manitas a sex change operation. And this is how they choose to portray that conversation, which at the very least is a little entertaining because it is so out of left field, which I can't say again for the rest of the songs, because the issue here, and this is the issue with a lot of musicals, like it's the main challenge when adapting a musical or just creating a movie musical in general, even if it's not based on any source material, is that it's on the director to make sure that the songs don't feel boring and stagnant and ultimately like they overstay their welcome, and that is the case with pretty much every single song in this film. Pretty much every single song here made me tune out, and that is the opposite of what you want to do if you are directing a movie musical. None of the musical sequences have any kind of interesting direction, even the ones that have choreography. It just feels as though this director was like, okay, the gimmick for this movie is that it's a musical, but we're not going to do any of the actual work to like make it worth being a musical. My boyfriend and I watched this movie like a couple hours before the Mike Tyson fight, which is probably the most cursed double feature viewing of all time. And after we watched it, we were like, wow, that was boring and it sucked. I wonder why it got so much praise at all of these film festivals. But film festival people are weird sometimes, so like, let's just chalk it up to like a weird anomaly. And then it started winning everything. Okay, so now that we have talked about the context of the movie itself, we have to talk about the making of this film, because that is ultimately what is catching a lot of heat in award season spaces right now. So let's talk a bit about the film's director and why and how this film was even made. So remember how I said that this movie was made by a French director? Well, that French director, Jacques Audiard, has gone on record saying that he didn't do much research about Mexico or its history or its culture before making the film.
You know, I think everything is very weird, but I remember watching the movie, one of the moments that got stuck in my head, and it was like literally at the beginning of the movie, was when Zoe Saldaña's character is like working. She's working, and I think her internet is like bad, and then she grabs her laptop and goes to a tianguis. and there is a printer, and she's working on in a tianguis with an internet in a printer, and she's with a glass of wine, and I was like, you know, that's not how tianguis work. and that and I think I mean, it probably sounds stupid, but it is important to, like, if you're going to make a movie about a country, that you do some research. And probably like, oh my God, but it's a tianguis. Yes, but tianguis are very important here. It's part of our culture, and it's in the details. It's the details.
You know, I had no idea what it was about or how it went. And then I saw it, and the first thing you see is a mariachi band, like getting assuming a mariachi band that dissipates into the horizon, and I was like, okay, what's going on here?
Additionally, the entire movie was filmed in France. Audiard has also said on record that this is because he didn't think that he could pull off all of the images that he had in his head if he were to film on the streets of Mexico.
Whenever they said that this movie, this film was happening around Mexico City, I was like, which part? Why is there a desert? Like, what are you talking about? You could say this happened like at the border, at the Mexican-US border, and I would be like, okay, I understand that. But no, it's supposed to happen in Mexico City, right at the heart of the country. And that's like, that's the kind of imagery that makes me say, why are you doing this, Jacques Audiard? Why are you writing Heart of Darkness for Mexico?
Mexicans who have watched the film have pointed out that this director clearly had no interest in learning about the country's culture or bothering to depict it accurately, which is kind of insane considering that a prominent storyline here is about the Mexican cartel, one of the most complex issues that the country has been dealing with.
I think it's about being respectful. This is a real problem in Mexico. It is a real situation. There are thousands of people looking for their people. And the way the movie came across the situation, it's really tone deaf. This drug lord, this did this, but now he's a good person, and then it's everything is fixed, and it's not. That's not how it is. That's not how it works.
And it's just kind of like, oh, Mexico dangerous, cartels bad, and that's it. Like, people are disappearing, Kim. Like, that's it. And it's not what I would want to see, like, as like some sort of representation for, like, as like a Mexican person, because it didn't even feel like it was like based in Mexico, and it wasn't. Like, it wasn't filmed in Mexico, and there wasn't really like much culture. I think they had like one scene about football.
It's weird that he chose the topic of drug cartels and all of that, because at the end of the day, what he's saying about this whole culture, this whole thing, is that the culture is all over Mexico, and it's control of all of it. It's like a black octopus wrap around the country. And all I'm thinking about as I'm watching this movie is, okay, but do you think you're the best person to talk about this?
Okay, so let's talk about the casting for this film. There are 4 main actresses in this movie. Karla Sofía Gascón, who's from Spain, Selena Gomez, who's a third-generation Mexican-American, Zoe Saldana, who's Dominican-American, and Adriana Paz, who plays Emilia's love interest, and she is from Mexico. Now, a big talking point for this movie that was directed by a French person, that was filmed in France, even though it's supposed to take place in Mexico, is why not include Mexican actresses to be the majority of the cast? And this was a question that I definitely had, and then I listened to the casting director for this film, who has spoken on their reasoning.
Tricky because Jesse, Rita, and Emilia, they were all Mexican characters. So we did a big search. We were open, and we did a big search in Mexico and in the US and in Spain and all Latin America. And then we wanted to keep it really authentic. But at the end of the day, the best actors who embodied these characters are the ones that are right here, right? So we had to figure out how to adjust authenticity, which I'm sure you ladies also said something, with the accents and, them not being necessarily native Mexican. It was a big search, and we saw a bunch of actresses everywhere. And for the role of Emilia, Jacques wanted it to be authentic and wanted a trans actor to play the role. There was no question about that. So we stayed with that through the whole process.
Now, I think this context is necessary in regards to the conversation surrounding one of this film's stars, Selena Gomez. When I first watched this movie, I thought that Selena's performance was, fine. Like, it wasn't particularly bad or good one way or the other to me. However, from what I understand, native Spanish speakers are very off-put by the fact that her Spanish does not sound convincing at all.
Then you have actors like Selena Gomez, like Zoe Saldaña, Karla Sofía Gascón, who are not fluent in the Spanish that's spoken in Mexico. It sounds weird, especially with the song, especially because there's a certain way in which songs are written here that they have certain rhyme, and so when you start the movie and hear the songs, they sound weird to somebody who's fluent in Spanish, because it's like, why are they talking like this?
Defenders of Selena Gomez's performance have pointed out that this is, in a way, an intentional character choice because Selena's character is not from Mexico and spent a lot of time in America, which would be the reasoning for her accent not sounding, natively authentic. However, it's clear that if you take the statement of the casting director into account, this choice was likely made because of Selena Gomez's limited Spanish. They didn't necessarily go into the project with that intention.
I do think, it was weird. You can barely understand what she's saying, especially when she's singing. It's like, what is she saying? And I speak Spanish. I mean, I live here. It's my main language. And it was kind of hard to listen in and to understand what she was saying. But at the end of the day, I think the movie has bigger problems than Selena Gomez's acting or Spanish. It doesn't seem... I think it is easier to criticize that than the real issues with the movie.
Now, at the end of that casting director's statement, you can hear that at the very least they were going for, the prospect of authenticity with Emilia Perez being played by a trans actress. The way that they handle this in the movie is that Karla Sofía Gascón, who plays Emilia Perez, does have a gender transformation. In the beginning of the film, when she is playing Manita, she's essentially in male drag. And then after her transformation, she presents herself visually as the trans woman that she actually is in real life. And after years of discourse of trans roles being played by cis actors and those cis actors getting rewarded for it, that's not the part that's controversial. What is controversial is how Emilia's transness is portrayed, especially by the end of the film. I'm thinking specifically about this one scene where Emilia and Jesse are fighting over, Jesse taking the kids out of Mexico City. And Emilia becomes erratic and violent in response. Her voice drops lower. In that moment, she's supposed to be read as a man. When researching more about the way that transness is depicted in this movie, I found this analysis from Fran Tirado to be really helpful. I'll link it in the description down below because I feel like it perfectly depicts what I've been trying to communicate about why this movie doesn't sit right with me as a cis person, but also definitely doesn't sit right with parts of the trans community as well. Fran says, back to the Mrs. Doubtfire comparison, which if you don't know is a comedy that bizarrely has a lot of similar plot points to this. If I were to harp on representation, it's abhorrent to me within the realism of the film that Emilia does what she does. She swaps genders, refuses accountability for a lifetime of bad behavior, and gaslights her wife and kids into spending time with her under fraudulent pretenses. This is also the plot of Mrs. Doubtfire, but Mrs. Doubtfire is a good film because it understands how absurd the character is. Emilia Perez doesn't know how absurd she is. Instead, her transition is framed as an absolution, used as a tool for deception, and made to be the reason for her redemption and saint-like anointing at the end. It is an idea of transness so completely from the cis imagination. If the film had instead realized, no, Emilia really is the villain, and she kept on with her bad behavior, maybe murdered more people, spun out of control, fed her own absurdity, now that's a movie I signed up for.
And me being Mexican, and I'm also trans, I'm also very excited to watch it, thinking oh, the intersectionality of being both trans and Mexican, I'm gonna really eat, I guess, and enjoy this movie. And I'm seated and I'm watching it, and there's And I'm realizing that there's nothing like, it's not made for me.
This movie has been lauded by so many in Hollywood as the progressive story that we all need at a time like this, when in reality the film itself is harping on a lot of common stereotypes associated with trans women in film, mainly that transitioning is used as a way to deceive and lie. Like, yeah, okay, love that this movie actually has a trans woman in it, I think that's good. And also, trans people aren't a monolith, and maybe some of them feel differently about this than I do, just watching the film and researching and making conclusions based on, you know, my limited view of the trans experience. But in that same vein, I also feel like this movie is not really about Emilia's trans experience. I feel like it's almost used as a device to kick off this dramatic cartel telenovela plot, but again, it's devoid of any of the humor and the camp and the absurdity that ultimately would make it a more compelling watch.
I'm a person that transitioned and in my late teens, so in early 20s, and I started like my little journey by like, I started Drag Race really late. That was like a good like start of it, because my first season was season 9 with Peppermint, and that was kind of like that path that kind of like of like queer like media and more trans representation, like Pose, Euphoria, where like Pose is like it's fictionalized, but it's covering also like that timeline of like the 90s and like the queer ball culture. In they have so much like knowledge about it. It's like they did their research, and that's like the comparison that I have with like Emilia Perez, where I'm thinking like, oh, if they completely did their research and like had some sort of empathy towards the trans community and like actually did some sort of research, maybe had like trans producers there, they could have, I feel like it could have been like more than what is becoming of it now.
And obviously, I'm not expecting the film's lead actress, Karla Sofía Gascón, to like trash the movie that she's in or anything, but she has been criticized for how she is responding to Mexican critics in particular about, you know, her role in the movie and the movie's portrayal of Mexico in general. In response to these criticisms, Karla posted this statement on Twitter. Can you imagine that after Picasso painted Guernica, other contemporary painters would have criticized him for not being from the Basque Country, for appropriating the pain of the victims, for not reflecting reality with totally distorted figures, etc.? Ridiculous, right? Tell me what cinema, what works for what can be created. You can't make romantic films in case it upsets those who don't have a partner. Creation has no limits or borders, and even less so imagination. So obviously what she's getting at here is that you shouldn't have to have the direct lived experience of the characters that you're portraying in art or the story that you're telling in order to make set art, which is true, I guess, but also it is very clear that the director of this movie had no interest in doing the necessary research to fill in the gaps based on his own personal lack of lived experience. And you can argue that these harmful or, you know, unknowledgeable depictions have been an issue in film and TV history forever. But then also you can't be surprised when parts of the trans community don't laud your movie as progressive and Mexicans don't praise your movie for simply being set in Mexico because the subject matter is like uneducated and offensive. You can't be the woke movie and not be woke, you know what I mean?
I don't know what's being covered in a way. Like, I don't know as like a trans person what exactly like this is supposed to mean. Like, what narrative are they trying to present like as a trans person? And it's kind of like it's like a blanketed, oh, trans representation, Mexican representation, and like this prestigious film that's getting all this like award buzz, and it's not really it's not translating to the people that you would think that it would it's supposed to captivate.
Okay, so to recap, this film is messy, boring, bad, and offensive, and it's winning so many awards right now. Why? Because it's a Netflix film, and maybe in the future, if these people who are praising it need projects funded, they can go to Netflix because they have enough goodwill by voting for it. I don't know enough about the inner workings of the Academy to confirm whether or not that could possibly be true. But TLDR, I don't like this movie. I think it's a bad movie. Throughout this research process, I've come to understand why not only it is a bad movie, but it's also an offensive movie. I don't want it to win, especially because there were so many amazing movies that came out this year, and they are all significantly better options to be awarded for Best Picture than this. Like Conclave. Everybody go watch Conclave. There's a vaping cardinal in it. Like, it's already just go watch Conclave.